Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CXPA sponsored webinar by Usermind, which will be focused today on the results of the 2020 Customer Journey Maturity Survey. This survey was a partnership between CXPA and Usermind, plus Heart of the Customer and Experience Enterprises. We're excited to share what we found with you. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Molly Perrin, and I am a Membership Community Manager with the CXPA. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to you later today. The recording will also be made available on the webinars page of our website. And for our CCXP certified attendees, this webinar is CRC eligible and will be recorded in your account within 2 weeks. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We should have time for some Q&A later on this hour. But now, without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Michel Feaster with Usermind to get us started.
Great. Hey, Molly, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Really excited to be here with you today. I don't think you could have 3 people more passionate about customer experience and the transformation around journey centricity that we're seeing in the marketplace. Just by way of quick introduction, I'm Michel Feaster. I am the founder and CEO of an enterprise startup called Usermind. We are a market leader in a space called journey orchestration, which we pioneered 7 years ago, and extremely proud to have been recognized as both a leader and the best product in the latest Forrester Wave on the space. So really excited to meet all of you today. Jim, will you introduce yourself next?
You bet. Jim Tincher with Heart of the Customer. I am our CEO, founder, and mapper-in-chief, as well as the second certified customer experience professional, being this is a CXPA panel. And I've been doing this for 7 years, same amount of time as Michelle, really. And again, my license plate is JRNYMAP, so very passionate about this. And then rounding us out today is Megan.
Thanks, Jim. I didn't know that about your license plate. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Burns. I am the principal of Experience Enterprises. I basically am Experience Enterprises. I am a speaker, thought leader, consultant in the customer and employee experience space. Many of you know me from the 10 years I spent at Forrester, from 2006 to 2016, or you know some of the work that I did there, which includes the customer experience maturity model that's in Outside In, as well as the CX index. And now I work with companies to help move forward and move this whole journey forward. So I'm excited to talk about this data. Michelle, you want to get us started?
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, I think all of us would agree that CX is in giant transformation. And so we'll talk a little bit about it, but we spent the last 4 months surveying all of you and trying to get feedback on the state of the market. So we're going to kick today's conversation off with a quick survey recap, just so you all understand which of your peers participated and kind of what the representation looked like. We're then going to dive into the state of the state. What did we learn about kind of the broad market, and what are the interesting insights that we've been able, Jim, myself, and Megan, been able to tease out of that data. We'll then focus a little bit on what do leaders look like. We wanted you all to be able to take away some actionable steps in your drive toward leadership in your own organization. So we are going to do a double click on kind of what really the top folks who participated look like and what are the takeaways from you. And then ideally we'll share some advice, kind of our thoughts for you as next steps, and ideally have some great, hopefully some great Q&A with all of you. So super excited to jump into that. Let's talk a little bit about the survey, Jim. Great. So, the good news is I think all of us are really focused on helping our organizations become more customer-centric. And so we're super delighted to have had over 200 folks respond kind of to our request for data about the state of the market. From a composition perspective, it's quite interesting. I think most of us often think that B2C really is where kind of customer centricity emerged. But what you can see in the data is that we got great participation from every type of company. So if you're on the call today and you're a B2B company, about half our respondents were B2B or B2B2C, and about the other half were pure B2C businesses. So super excited to see virtually every company type is taking this transformation seriously and was participating to give us feedback. It is clear that CX is a young kind of function that companies are centralizing and creating it. And so it's been interesting to see that we see a fairly young tenure, companies having, as little as 1 year on average of kind of a dedicated CX organization, to some companies that have had that, for more than a few years. I think we see definitely that some verticals move faster than others. So I don't think there's surprises here. We're seeing a tremendous amount of response from financial services companies in the survey, I think driven by all the fintech startups out there that are putting pressure from a CX point of view. No shock, tech and internet companies, great participation, companies that are digital first. And then interestingly enough, we didn't get a chance to talk about insurance as a vertical, but I think, we're seeing increasingly, with COVID, I think folks are really thinking about insurance today, and that's becoming, very much a CX focus. From a seniority perspective, if you're sitting in the audience and kind of wondering the level of folks that responded, I think about 60% of the folks who engaged with us were kind of director and above. So we got some really good participation, both from, I think, the folks every day kind of on the CX front lines as doers, but also folks leading the strategy. So really happy to see that kind of mix of respondents. And then from an average team size, we saw everything from, small organizations which might only have 1 or 2 folks, up to kind of an average team size of about 10. So we're definitely seeing the investment and the team size in CX kind of grow. So hopefully, as you look at this, all of you on the call are seeing yourself in these numbers and can feel comfortable that the insights we're going to share with you are kind of representative of your business and your company. Jim or Megan, anything you want to add, or are you guys cool if we dive right in? Awesome. So, hey, Megan, would you mind, I'd love, given kind of your background and your experience as an analyst, I'd love to have you kind of jump in and kind of share with some of the folks the state of the practice. What do we see in the data?
Absolutely. And this data was really fun for me to look at because the first time I did one of these surveys about the state of the practice in CX was 15 years ago. So it's pretty amazing to see how far we've come. We started with what seems like a simple but non-trivial question, which is how well do you understand what journeys even are? Because we don't want to assume, and I still work with companies every day that are just getting started. And the good news is most of the people who took the survey, 88%, said they totally get what journeys are and are bought in. You'll notice though that there's a steep drop off. We also asked how well senior leaders in the organization understand journeys and how well the average employee understands journeys. Because if you're going to become a journey-centric company and manage those instead of products and services, kind of helps if everybody knows what they are. I was pleasantly surprised to see that 47% of senior leaders, 47% of people felt their senior leaders also deeply understood what a customer journey was. I think we have some work to do with the average employees, and that has implications later on. But the reality is the more people talk about and understand this concept of customer journeys, the more pervasive it will be. But we're getting there because people are mapping and starting to map. Jim, you went ahead to talk about this a little bit.
Sure. So talking about mapping, it's very difficult, I would say impossible, to manage a journey if you don't understand what the journey is from your customer's viewpoint. And of course, journey mapping has been around for a bit, and we want to understand what is that current state. Those familiar with our book, How Hard Is It to Be Your Customer, know we did some surveys a few years ago regarding the state of the journey mapping, which we're able to update here. And so we asked how many people, how many journeys the average participant has mapped. We can see that, and this surprised me, that half of them have mapped fewer than a quarter of the journeys. There's a lot of research from Forrester, from Qualtrics and others saying that most CX professionals are mapping journeys. What this told us is that most are stopping after only a couple. So journey mapping has not become as pervasive as, again, half have only mapped less than a quarter of the journeys. And when we asked about what journeys they mapped, we really saw 2 pop to the top: onboarding and then service and support. And I would say that reflects my experience as well. We see onboarding as a really critical journey, particularly for B2B and B2B2C, which again, we're a lot of the representatives here. It's important in B2C as well, but we really see that pop in B2B. And service and support is always a concern. And so it wasn't surprising, but it was good to see that confirmation over these were the 2 most common journeys. When we asked who did the mapping, was it you, did you use a vendor? 82% did it internally. Now, this is not speaking to whether customers were involved. We'll come back to that later on, but 4 out of 5 did do it all in-house. And then lastly, why was the mapping done? What was the goal? And you can see the number one was to reduce churn. And that fits my experience, that makes sense. What we did put on the slide, but we'll come back to it later on, is that the second most common reason was not a business metric, but was instead to improve a survey score, such as NPS. And so we see that again, journey mapping is less pervasive than I expected, but when it's happening, it's onboarding and service support, primarily done internally to either reduce churn or to improve a metric, a survey score. All right, Megan, let's hear a little bit more about what else is happening.
Yeah, so we also asked about technology, of course, and ownership. And in the technology side, it wasn't a huge surprise, right? The most popular technologies that companies were using are the ones that have been around the longest and have become pretty pervasive anyway. Customer survey tools, marketing automation. Marketing often controls its own budget in a way that CX doesn't, so it's not surprising to see that. And then sentiment analysis, which is just so amazingly powerful and useful. I was a little surprised to see that 64% of companies are using homegrown tools and systems, and I'm kind of curious about what exactly those are, but that's for the next study. The other thing that was really curious to us was we asked if people had journey owners, right? If you're going to manage something, to Jim's point, you have to know what it looks like, and you have to have somebody who's in charge of that management. We were pleasantly surprised to see that 44% of the respondents said yes, in fact, they do have people named as journey owners for their journeys. There's an asterisk to that, though, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the webinar, but some of it has to do with what is an owner and some people's definition of an owner versus what we think it is. So I'll foreshadow that a little bit with the next slide, which was sort of, we asked people, where do you think you are? And 57% of the respondents said that they were either novice journey managers, journey management programs, or they hadn't even started. And that's actually not all that surprising to me. Partly because there's still a lot of people that are new to this, and partly because many companies are harder on themselves than they think. You don't have a frame of reference, so you think, oh, we still don't know what we're doing, but you probably know more than you do, so just keep that in mind. But the things that hold people back from what they told us hold them back, not enough or the right people. And that one's really interesting to tell if that's people with journey mapping skills or just not enough people to tackle the organizational complexity, which was the second biggest hurdle. And that kind of made me think to Jim's book title, okay, if you think your organization is too complicated, imagine what your customers think about it. And then the last one is a perennial classic, leadership buy-in and support. And in this one, what I've seen in all my conversations with folks is the buy-in is actually further along than the support. The buy-in is sort of, yeah, okay, this is important. We should manage things from the customer perspective. The support, when it comes to people, dollars, time, focus, that's where we still have some work to do. But not everybody. We actually had quite a few leaders in this survey, and Jim and Michel are going to tell us what's different about them.
You bet. So let's look at what is a leader, and more importantly, what do they do differently? We'll begin with defining what do we mean by a leader. And we didn't want to use sentiment or self-assessment. We wanted to really define a leader as somebody who's doing something about improving journeys. And so we selected 3 questions that were about action. First of all, can you monitor the customer's journey across channels in real time? Can you see where your customers are as they go across, whether we saw earlier, service and support and onboarding were 2 of the most common? Doesn't have to be those, but can you see where customers are throughout the journey? Next, can you orchestrate a specific customer journey across the channels in real time? Can you, if somebody has a problem, can you automatically work to make it better? Then lastly, can you link your orchestration efforts to improvement in specific business metrics? We're going to talk more about that here, but that's really critical. And so we wanted to know who is doing something. Which of our survey respondents are taking action? As you can see, 29% or 44 respondents fell into this leader category. And they're quite a bit different from the rest. And so, Michelle, tell us a little bit more about this.
Sure. So I think, I talked about this earlier when we kind of introduced the survey. One thing is we do see companies who are B2C have more business pressure to be great at journeys and experiences, right? They are directly interacting with their customers on a daily basis. Their customers' activity or inactivity, delight or frustration directly ties to business results. And so, I think for those of you, in the webinar, I think it's an interesting lesson to be looking at even though it may not be, you might be B2B, what are B2C companies doing? What are the techniques they're applying? What are the technologies that they're using that you can bring back and apply to your business? So I think all three of us thought that was pretty intriguing to see the B2C companies stand out as being, very focused on this kind of end-to-end journey experience. I think the second one is a no-brainer, but it ties back to our earlier data point that these journeys are inherently cross-functional and it requires senior leadership support. And to Megan's point, it requires senior leaderships who, number one, understand what a journey is, right? Really are bought into the fact that journeys are the mechanism by which you're not just going to delight customers, but drive great business outcomes. And I think, give you buy-in and support. And so this was a key criteria or a key set of feedback we heard in the leader cohort, is that these CX teams feel that their senior leaders are bought into the concept and are empowering them and investing in improving journeys on a day-to-day basis. And the third piece is something I've seen certainly every day in the last 7 years of building Usermind, but I think it was great to see it echoed from our leader cohort, is that every journey has a business KPI or a business outcome that it can drive. And I think this is highly correlated to get senior leader support. My experience has been that quite often, although NPS is extremely important and certainly is a great goal to drive for, when you as CX leaders can articulate LTV impacts, right? How to reduce churn, how to drive up lifetime value, how to incrementally improve conversions. When you can actually measure the journey's impact on the business top or bottom line, that is a really effective way to persuade your leadership and to get and keep the buy-in that you need to be successful. So, that was the piece that I think was most impactful to me personally, and I think is a very important nugget that all of you thinking about how to create senior leadership and buy-in should really be focused on. Your business executives want to hear the business case in terms of business outcomes as opposed to attitudes. And I think the more we can help you and we can kind of help each other to articulate the ROI of improving a journey in that language, the more successful we're going to be in getting leadership support to help you change and optimize journeys. So really interesting stuff there, Jim.
Yep, and when you have a journey mapping license plate, you get the journey mapping slides. So let me talk a little bit more about what the leaders do in terms of mapping that's different. Now, we actually saw substantial differences in how many journeys they mapped, but also we saw that leaders were more likely to have mapped the sales journey. If you're familiar with customer thinks research, they found the same thing about 1.5 years ago. So it was interesting to see that. They're also more likely to map the service journey as well as onboarding. So they're taking the time to do the mapping of multiple journeys so that they can understand how they need to orchestrate those, how they need to take action. Next then, and I'm really surprised after, depending on your definition, 15 or 20 years of CX as a capability, that we still have to talk about the need to involve customers in your customer journey map. But we find that the leaders are far more likely to include customers, not just in the mapping, but also in the improvement, by getting them involved as you're testing out ideas, by putting customers in the center of your business. Again, it surprises me that in a customer experience survey, we have a lot of people who are not involving customers in the journey mapping, or more importantly, journey improvement. And the third one, now the third
Hey,
time
Tim?
we come, yep.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to make a point on this. One of the things that I find in talking to companies about this is leaders think they know their customers well enough. And I always tell people, it's not that you don't know enough, it's actually that you know too much. There are things about your business and your journey that you take for granted that look and feel different to customers because they don't know as much as you do. And that makes this idea of needing to involve customers a little more palatable for senior leaders. So sorry to interrupt, but.
No, that's a great point. Let me just go quickly a little bit deeper on that. Early on in our process, we do what's called a hypothesis mapping workshop, where we ask the organization to walk through the customer's journey, what they think it looks like. And as your point, the steps are usually pretty close. They know what customers are doing. What they're missing is when we ask what's most important to customers. What are the steps that make a substantial difference in terms of winning loyalty? And that's what organizations typically miss. They get way down the weeds, and as Megan said, you're exactly right. They know too much. It's important to have that beginner's mind by talking to your customers. The third one we've talked about, this is the third time I'm bringing it up here, is it's really not about Net Promoter Score. So far this year, we've interviewed 90 customer experience leads, as well as CEOs, CFOs, and the rest. And I can pretty much predict the level of success somebody has in one of our first questions, which is, if I were to ask you whether the experience is getting better or worse, how would you answer it? A lot of customer experience leaders will start and end with Net Promoter Score, other surveys. But these leaders, the best, they're using the survey as more of a diagnostic. But the ultimate goal is a business metric. We want to reduce churn. We want to reduce support, because support is typically expensive for both the customer and your company. Business KPIs, and that's reflected in the maps as well. So really, these three things stand out. They map more journeys and very specific ones. They involve customers in both the mapping and the improvement process, and they wrap it all up by trying to find that intersection between customer success and company success.
Totally agree. Hey, Jim, if I could add, kind of 2 points, what we're seeing, as kind of a technology vendor here. I love the early point about many of our customers start with onboarding, but I think these journeys, I call it journey laddering. So this idea that we would map the sales journey, connect it to onboarding, connect it to service. I think ultimately, by laddering your journeys together over time, that's how you truly drive LTV and minimize churn. I think it's very fair to start with a single journey, but I do think that the end in mind that we should all be aiming for is kind of connecting these experiences together, because they're all going to drive those business outcomes you cared about. And then when I talk to customers about this, why are business metrics so important? I like to say that the opportunity of digital is to, for the first time, directly align the interest of the customer and the interest of the company. And what I mean by that is the interest of the customer is to get the outcome they want out of that journey as fast as possible, as frictionlessly as possible. And the interest of the company is to deliver that financial return to the business. And when you look at it, great experiences truly do align the customer's need. I want to, activate a phone. I want to set up a bank account. I want to, buy a new pair of shoes, and I want to do it as easily as I possibly and as quickly as I can. And if you deliver that experience, to your point about these business metrics and KPIs, that actually drives the top and bottom line of the company. And so I like to think about, by staying focused on the business KPIs, that it's counterintuitive, but that is actually how you create the greatest alignment between customer objective and business objective, is ultimately through that KPI. That is the best measure of success. So, pretty fascinating. Great to see that feedback kind of come out of the survey.
Yeah, and go a little bit deeper on that. When I talk to customers and clients, I'll often ask, does your CEO care about survey scores? And a lot of times they'll say yes. Then I'll ask, does your CFO care? That's usually when things get kind of quiet. But who does your CEO spend most time listening to? I guess, Michelle, you spend a lot of time with your CFO. Most CEOs do. And that's how you get the resources, because Michelle's going to talk here in a second about technology. Technology isn't free. And so it really takes that engagement with senior executives in order to get the buy-in to bring in the technology to improve the journey.
Yeah, I mean, what a great lead in. So, another thing we were asking leaders is kind of what technologies are you using in this CX ecosystem? I think it's very fascinating to see the convergence of traditional CX tools. So we heard, our leaders had a voice of the customer, technology, and they had legacy and kind of homegrown technologies to, evaluate CX. Back to Megan's earlier point. So it was pretty clear that every leader was probably today that participated in this survey was on the forefront of adopting voice of the customer technology over the last 10 years. It was also interesting to see the emergence of analytics. So increasingly we're seeing companies invest in journey analytics or sentiment analysis to understand out of all those surveys, what are they really telling us about our customers' experience and their emotional reaction to the interacting with your brands and your customers. I thought it was fascinating to see so much MarTech adoption here, and certainly we at Usermind and selling journey orchestration, we see this every day, which is increasingly people are thinking about journeys and engagement end to end. And so the idea is we do want to take surveys, we do want to get our voice of the customer feedback, but we also want to shape and improve the daily interaction between marketing and the customer, between our website experience. And so I think it's quite fascinating to see this data here that CX leaders are not only embracing technology, but are increasingly starting to think about both traditional CX tech, historical voice of the customer analytics, as well as really shaping real-time interaction in all channels, right? And I would expect this will extend into the call center over time. So, I think our leaders are both adopters of technology and they leverage technology to improve CX pretty broadly. I don't know, anything stand out to both of you here that you would point out based on your experience?
Well, the MarTech piece doesn't surprise me, since very early on, a lot of customer experience programs have had their sort of origins. They've started to germinate within marketing. Some don't, some come from operations, but we have more and more marketers who are starting to grasp that a marketing campaign and a customer journey are not the same thing. A customer does not have a journey of being marketed to, right? A particular journey either fits in a particular campaign fits into a journey that they're already having or sparks a journey that they didn't know they wanted to have. And we've been kind of beating that drum for a while now. And I really see in the traditional marketing community, more and more people getting that mindset shift, which for them is enormous. Yeah. Live and die by campaigns. So.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a shift. I describe campaigns as essentially a television show. It's a one-way conversation with the customer. And when you really shift to being journey centric, to your point, what you want to have is a two-way conversation. You want to have a telephone. And I think that is what's really driving a whole new set of technology kind of into this MarTech space, certainly specifically, at Usermind, the opportunity for journey orchestration platforms to kind of connect all this different technology together and optimize those experiences end to end. But, kind of great to see that, or hear, Megan, that you're seeing the same thing very broadly.
Yeah.
There's another possibility, I wonder. I'm kind of springing this on two of you because I was talking to my team this morning reviewing these results. And a substantial number of participants said they hadn't even begun in marketing automation, a big number of them. So I'm wondering how much of this technology and how much of this is customer experiences, knowledge, and involvement with technology. Because I suspect some of the people saying, oh, our organization isn't doing marketing automation, or some of these others, they are, but that CX hasn't bridged that gap to get involved with it. I wonder if sometimes CX becomes their own silo.
Yeah,
that absolutely happens.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Michel.
No, you jump in, and then I have some thoughts to share on org structure for sure. Yeah.
I definitely think that happens, Jim. I think there's also a pretty big gap in what's customer experience. I see, right, web personalization on there. Having your name in an email does not necessarily impact the customer experience. Maybe it's a little bit better, but it's not great. A/B testing, whether the button being green or red drives more conversions. That's business automation and business outcome automation, but it really doesn't change the customer experience all that much. So some of these technologies that are traditionally MarTech people don't think of as customer experience, or vice versa. They do think about them when in reality they're serving more of a marketing purpose. So there's probably a little bit of gray area here.
Yeah, I like to think of it as customer engagement is really what we're trying to solve. And that's why marketing, MarTech fits into that, and the call center fits into that, and voice of the customer fits into that. And so it's really all about how do you engage the customer in the context of the journey that they're in, kind of back to aligning interests. To your question, Jim, about silos, we're seeing a lot of really fascinating org changes happen. So we've seen some companies recently where CX was so successful that CX strategists are actually moved into the various business functions. And so a marketing team will actually have a CX strategist inside that team as an advocate for journeys, and kind of getting the CX discipline closer to where the rubber meets the road, helping the digital team actually deliver great experiences end to end. That's been a pretty fascinating kind of shift that I've seen, where CX moves from being a dedicated team to essentially being a little bit of a liaison, right? Still being a function, but becoming more embedded in the businesses and kind of teams that they support. I don't know if either of you are seeing that, but I do think it'll be very fascinating to see how do we take the discipline that's research oriented and voice of the customer oriented and make it more active in real time. How do we organizationally solve for that?
Yeah, I'm absolutely seeing that happen. And Michelle, we call that a federated model, where there's a little small central team and people are out there. And it comes in part from the fact that you still have to coordinate across both axes, right? Organizing around customers is important, but you also need some way to manage the business. And so people tend to move more towards a decentralized model because it allows for quicker action when people understand and have internalized the customer centricity and customer journey mindset. So that's a key tipping point for when that happens.
100%.
Speaking of which,
yeah.
there's a perfect tee up, and I didn't even mean that. Journey owners, I mentioned this before, right? Who owns the journeys? Whether or not you have someone who is called a journey owner is a pretty big sign. But one of the hypotheses that I had going into this survey was that what people consider owners might not be owners the way we would define them. And that turned out to be true. So leaders are more likely to have those assigned journey owners, but those journey owners have some very specific abilities and access that journey owners in non-leader companies do not. In particular, they're more likely to have actual control over the processes that execute the journey. So if the feedback shows something, they can actually then go make it happen. And if not that, they are more directly connected to the people who do the resource allocation. So a lot of the non-leaders, we found that their journey owners influence the people who allocate resources. And from that far away, it's no surprise that you don't have the right support. So journey owners have some real authority or access to the authority and a seat at the tables where the important things are being decided. And I think that's really how you should think about what a journey owner is, because otherwise you're just kind of a journey monitor, I think.
Yeah, and Megan, I don't know about you just on this point, but there's a role of journey owner and there's a title. It's interesting, I'm seeing in some companies, particularly banks, where product teams are stepping into this function and are beginning to say, we don't just own, commercial banking, we actually have journey owners inside that product team thinking about onboarding or activation or specific journey experiences. So I'm seeing in some cases the product team step into this function. And as I said, in other cases, I'm seeing this kind of CX strategist role emerge in a digital team where there is now a journey owner in digital and helping those teams kind of think about how to deliver the best experiences through the existing engineering resources and digital, et cetera. So I don't know, I'm just interested, are you guys seeing any other different titles, or, I just want to make sure people can see themselves in this data and have some ideas for like which teams could be stepping in and kind of taking on this ownership role.
Well, from what we've seen, it's varied quite a bit. It's often somebody who's already involved in the journey at some level, who is reassigned into a way of managing it. And they may or may not report into CX, more often a dotted line. If you think of CX, it's typically a mile wide and inch deep, responsible for that end-to-end journey. We found that a lot in the survey. I like to think the journey owner is an inch wide, a mile deep, where they're really focused on just one journey, the service journey, for example, the product ordering journey, but they get very, very deep in that and are working across the silos to try to create a consistent experience. But it can come from anywhere, not as often from CX, at least what I've seen, more often from somewhere inside the organization who already has the recognition and the buy-in through members of the journey.
Yeah, and there's another cluster of journey owners who really would be more aptly called journey tiebreakers. So people start their first set of journey owners is at the very senior level, where they appoint someone as the journey owner because it means they are the final decision maker over if two teams disagree, which way are we going to go? And then it often ladders down to those people Jim was talking about who are actually more on a day-to-day basis. So I don't frankly care where it starts as long as it starts, but that that tiebreaker role is a very important one. It wouldn't be a webinar without a dog. I love it.
I've been sitting here holding my cat off, trying to underneath the camera, so. All right, so Megan, what are some recommendations? What can the viewers today do?
Yeah, we've thrown a lot of information at you, and the question that everybody is always looking for is, so what? Jim, if you could go back one.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So we split our recommendations into two groups, and the first was for that 57% of those respondents and those of you who identify with them that haven't started or that you feel like you're still in the novice stage. And our first recommendation was to start by identifying a critical business problem that senior leaders care about. Look at what's on the dashboards, what's on the senior leadership agenda, because it's a lot easier to get them to pay attention to something they're already paying attention to than to try to jump up and down and go, hey, over here, and digital transformation around COVID is consuming everything that they're doing. So the more you can kind of jump onto their momentum and pick that business problem, the easier it's going to be to kind of get the value of a journey mindset into their world. Map the journey. Jim said you can't really manage anything if you don't know what it looks like. Following best practices, including customers, using it as a way to educate executives on the importance of journeys. One of the things that I have seen quite often is executives who don't even realize what the journey is like. So they may not know all the information they need to know, but just the process of trying to describe the business in the customer's terms is an epiphany moment for some executives. Use that mapping to establish a journey owner, right? Once you have that artifact that captures that, then it's easier to say, here's the person who's in charge of this map and changing it, right? Because we're going to change it in a systemic way going forward. And then use that ownership and map as the foundation to start building your customer-focused technology stack. Because when you can point to, I have a journey, here's what it looked like, here's who's in charge of it, here's what we need to really start to manage it in that sophisticated way, it walks you toward that leader status in a stepwise function, but it's how everybody, I think, in the leader category got there. And Jim, you and Michelle were going to tell us a little bit about what if you're further along?
Mm-hmm.
Then what?
Yep, so if you're looking at a level up the program, maybe you've started doing a little bit here about monitoring journeys, you've begun, maybe you have some journey owners. What else do you need to do? Now, first of all, get comfortable talking technology. Not that CX is going to become the technology owner, But if we look at how to create a consistent, scalable journey over time, that's really hard to do in an analog fashion. This was true before COVID. With COVID, it's really started to become more critical to look at how does technology create a scalable, consistent journey. So first of all, get comfortable with this. That really seems to separate those who are taking customer experience and journeys seriously, or as I like to say, it's a hobby. If it's become something you're doing professionally to differentiate, then technology is going to be a key part of that. And one of those is really journey analytics. To look at that so you can understand first what's happening today, to move from the analog of journey mapping to the more digital journey analytics as you get ready for orchestration.
Thanks, Jim. Hopefully the pups stay quiet here for a moment. So look, I think, as Jim mentioned, obviously you start by, my advice would be pick one or two key journeys. To Jim's point, right, let's develop the baseline. Let's start to create, shine a spotlight really on what is the state of the current customer experience, because quite often your executives don't realize the relationship between these CX challenges and the business outcomes that journey is trying to drive. So from my perspective, the power of baselining your first journey and establishing analytics is that it actually helps you drive bullet 3, which is really crisp up your ability to articulate the KPIs via an executive scorecard that journey supports. The single best way we've seen to create executive alignment around a journey transformation is to help executives understand the relationship between that journey, your customer's experience of that journey, and the business outcomes the executives want to drive. If you can articulate how improving that customer journey will drive top line or reduce OpEx via avoiding calls, that is compelling to leaders to invest people and time. And so, build your baseline, build those key scorecards so you can speak in a language with your executives in order to get people and funding attached to that initiative. And then, our perspective is, we call it a lighthouse, is really then move into orchestrating journeys. My experience has been, we always tell customers, baseline one journey, build the KPI and dashboards for that journey, do some basic orchestration. And orchestration, for those in the audience, is really the idea that we're in real time going to shape the experience. We're going to trigger a survey in real time. We're going to send a different offer to the customer. We're going to route them to a human at exactly the right moment. And the reason I think this is compelling is that it cements the ROI of optimizing journeys. So when we work with our customers, we say, look, let's pick one or two. Let's baseline them. Let's get these analytics, as Jim was referring to. Let's show our executives and leaders the business impact of improving that journey. And what orchestration does is pay down that promise. It actually delivers those improvements in conversions, or deflects calls, or ideally drives more profit to the bottom line. And my experience has been, if you take a single journey and do that end to end, you will profoundly transform the culture of your company, because people will now have seen the journey, have seen actually how journeys deliver the business outcomes that we're all metriced on and rewarded for driving. And I think what we've seen is the companies that build that lighthouse well, from analytics to KPIs to orchestration, end up driving much larger programs and transformations, because the executives are fully bought into the business outcome of those investments.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Drew. Yeah, I run the marketing team for Usermind, and I volunteered to moderate the Q&A portion. If you have questions, please go into the GoToWebinar panel and submit them. It looks like we have at least a couple and a couple others. So the first question is, having journey owners assumes a business is receptive to having empowered cross-functional process owners. Was this a question that was asked in the survey?
Starting out with a doozy. Well, from a survey question perspective, I don't think it was, Jim. We didn't get that complicated. From a conceptual perspective, that's where I think some of the evolution of what is an owner comes into play, because if you're not receptive to having that, you might have a steering committee, and the journey owner might be the touch point for that steering committee. So it absolutely does require kind of embracing a cross-functional accountability, which very many people are not comfortable with. But to Michelle's point, doing that and seeing it work in one situation is the best possible persuasion for getting other people to feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah, and I would say, for the person who asked that question, within your company, what we try to find is a business unit that might already be standalone. So within a very large bank, you go to the commercial bank and you find the team working on mortgage origination. And at least in my experience, if you can pick a single business, you're looking for an organizational structure where there might be product owners or CX strategists. That's the kind of place we look to begin. When we partner with companies, is try to find these little mini GM business units or people who are already, parts of your company that might already have a simpler cross-functional organizational structure. And then we work with them to try to drive that lighthouse and bring that as a case study to more senior leadership to drive a broader rethinking in the organization. So, I fully agree with Megan. Journeys are inherently cross-functional. We have to help people think about how to attack that problem. But I think at least our experience in engaging with our customers is there's quite often pockets inside your companies that might be more ready than others. And certainly from our perspective, that's where we try to start.
Jim, did you have a comment there? It looks like you're going to jump in as well.
Sure. Yeah, so really one of the things I look for is existing agile teams, because you often in that situation, you have already agreed as organization that you're going to be able to move quickly. You're likely having product owners, Michelle's point. That's a good clue that something is set up for you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim. Cross-functional collaboration is not unique to CX.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Look for an agile team, look for a business unit, right? Look for a small product organization. In most companies, even though a large company might have many groups that struggle to be cross-functional, I think there are usually these kind of thought-leading teams, and that's, it's typically where we would certainly start. So yeah, I love that point about agile. Drew?
Yeah, so another question, maybe I'll start with Jim here. Is there a low cost, no cost way to include customers in your journey mapping exercises as a proof of concept for a dedicated spin on real journey mapping?
All right. Well, I think first of all, there feels like there's an assumption there that you have to have clients on site participating in a workshop for journey mapping. And at least that's not how we do it. We use customers to talk to them about what they're going through today, where the biggest challenges are. And so we do that simply through Zoom. Be able to talk to them, to get 45 minutes to an hour with 20 to 30 customers. The only cost there is a Zoom subscription and time. Whereas certainly I encourage hiring journey mapping vendors. The reality is we know 78% aren't doing that, or whatever the number was. Most are not. And it's really about getting that voice of customer. Now, when you do set up time with your customer, I highly encourage you to bring an executive alongside with you, to bring other folks from within the organization, because that's one of the big benefits is hearing how customers actually view your journey. And so there are ways to do this at a lower cost, but it's blocking and tackling, it's working hard, it's getting out to your customers individually.
Great.
I think a lot of people underestimate how, sorry, Drew. I just want to put in one thing. I think a lot of people think they're imposing on customers and they underestimate how excited customers are and happy they are. Everyone loves talking about themselves and their own experience. So in my mind, it's not that hard to get people to say, hey, can we spend a half an hour or 45 minutes talking about how you experience our company?
Well, Megan said there's really important. It's not talking about you, it's talking about your customer and their experience. And that's what makes a big difference. But there's one other part, and that is if you do that and never follow up with the customer of what you did, then it does become very expensive to hire somebody to cajole your customers to agree to be talked to again. So make absolutely certain to close the loop with them about what you've done, what they've shared with you.
Great, so a bit of a high level question I'll open up to the entire panel. How do we create an effective journey for customers?
First of all, going back to, I'll mention the book again, because why not? One of the things we talked about there is most important for this is to have a broad cross-functional team involved in the work, because you cannot do this on your own. You need to bring across your partners. 70% of the time, IT is not involved. They should be involved 100% of the time. 93% HR is not involved. Every customer experience project is a culture project. So get a broad team involved. That's number one. I would say number two is define what is the emotional outcome you're trying to create in the journey. How should customers feel as a result of your work? And then once you've done that and you've gotten the voice of the customer, then engage that broad cross-functional team to say, how do we do things differently? And then lastly, then use that to get in front of your executives to get the resources in order to do it. We could do multiple webinars on that question. It's big, but those are some of my big thoughts. Michelle, Megan?
One of my suggestions is to take the how out of it, and sometimes a little history will help us. So asking people to describe, customers had a similar goal, right? Buy a house, get a mortgage, find a supplier for my business. People have been doing that for 50 to 100 years. If you took the technology out of it and just talked about what was the process they used, that tends to be pretty consistent in terms of how they think about it. That way, then you can get down into the weeds and you might say, this is still what they need or want to do. They're just doing it differently, right? Grocery shopping. We all need to get food. We get food from grocery stores. We get food from food delivery services. Now we're getting food from meal kit services. Same human goal, different journey. And so that gives people, I think, a touchstone that you can go back to that helps you really think of how to do what the customer wants to do as simply as possible.
Yeah. You know, I'm, as the technologist on the panel, I kind of think about it as 4 core things, and I'm admittedly coming at it from a technology point of view. But to me, one is, what's the business outcome that the journey is trying to drive? That's your North Star, because that is the way you align your customer goal with your goal. So if the outcome is like getting a mortgage, until the mortgage is closed, the journey's not done. And I think we lose sight of that. Like, that's the most important thing you first set up. The second thing I think about is personas and segments, which is like, what are the kinds of people, the clusters of the kinds of people that want to do this? You know, you might have me, who's very tech savvy. You might have my mom, who's a you know, not a technophobe, but certainly, you know, would prefer to talk to a human being. I prefer to do everything all digitally. So I think you want to think about which segments are you really servicing, and is there 1 or 2 of those segments that are the most important persona or segment that you're trying to serve, because that's going to shape the type of experience that you want to create. I certainly think about frictionless, which is, you know, increasingly, you know, Amazon's probably the bar for this, but as we move to digital, the goal is to remove speed, and like the less friction, the best. That wasn't very articulate English after an hour on the webinar, but the idea is, where would the customer fall out, and how can you use technology to remove as much friction as possible? And then my last thought process would be, where can I use history? Although personalization certainly isn't the main driver of CX, personalization is a way to drive LTV and long-term engagement, and not make me tell you the same data over and over again. So that'd be the last question I'd ask myself is, you know, how can I in this journey use, how many of these people are existing customers or previous customers of my company, and how can I use what I know about them to make it not just frictionless, but obviously delightful, better, easier. And so I think if I was trying to attack digitally reimagining one of your services or your journeys, those would be the 4 things I would try to gain alignment on in the company. And every technology choice and everything I did would be to drive to those kind of 4 core keys.
Great. So one final question before we go to, you know, wrap up thoughts from the panel. I'm going to paraphrase this one because it's kind of long. But basically, it's saying this person is a new chief or head of CX in a company, and they're asking about, like, how do they go about, you know, making friends, building relationships to, like, eventually become the natural journey owner. So, like, if CX comes in, you know, like, how do they begin to build their ability, you know, to become that eventual journey owner if they're not the likely, or it's not clear and obvious that they should be that person from the beginning? How do they go about that?
I think Michelle gave us a clue earlier on when she's talking about finding a specific, she didn't use the word champion, but essentially that's what she's saying. Find a place where you can have great impact. We look at one of our clients, Darren from ABC Software, talked about in the book. He found a champion in marketing who wanted to improve the sales journey. Now, a lot of times CX is not involved in the sales journey, but he was able to use that to build a win, to show the impact of changing a journey. And from there was able to move into product development and other journeys. But I would try, which said earlier, typically CX is a mile wide and inch deep. Your first choice is that your model or not? If you want to be an owner, then you've got to find that inch deep space where you can participate, and so find a champion.
Yeah. And I would tack on to that two things that are driven more by human behavior and behavioral science than anything unique to CX. One is ask questions, because forcing people to think differently about something they already know is much more persuasive, because then you're not telling them they're wrong. And acknowledge positive intent. I know that security or risk or finance and profit margin are important, all of the things that whoever this is cares about. What's the balance between those things and customer experience? It's not necessarily something we've thought about that explicitly before. And going in with that sort of respect for the things that they have been doing and trying to do, as well as just a curiosity that I always say, you want to engineer an opportunity for other people to have their own epiphanies rather than tell them. You want to create the situation there where they go, oh, I never thought about it that way. That works.
Well, I think we're about at time. So I know, we certainly want to thank everybody for joining today, but we wanted as a panelist, each of us to leave you with kind of one thought or piece of advice. So I don't know, Jim, would you like to share kind of your one piece of advice? Megan, maybe then you go, and I'm happy to wrap it up, and we'll hand it back over to CXPA to kind of finish up the webinar.
Jim, we can't hear you.
First advice would be to unmute. Second piece of advice would be to find that intersection of when the customer and the company both win. If your customer is spending a lot of time in support, they're not winning, neither are you. If they're having a hard time putting an order, they're not winning, neither are you. Find that area of mutual success, find the KPI behind that, and find the business owner. Start there.
Okay, final thought. I think I probably just said it a little bit, which is you have to approach everything customer experience related with a positive intention of all the other things that the business is trying to accomplish, because they do matter. The business, you do need to have a business, but it's a successful business through an exceptional customer experience. So just in everything you do as you try to build this practice, have a yes and attitude as opposed to a but. I think that's going to make everything you do much easier.
Yeah. I think my piece of advice would be, find a way to get a win. I think we focus sometimes too much on journeys are amazing, customer centricity is amazing. These are often big concepts for people to grasp. Find a business problem and deliver a win. Jim's point about, pick one area of friction, because to me, delivering business results is what will get you more people, more budget, more investment, more focus. And I think oftentimes the skepticism you're going to face is from business owners who've been talked to about experience, and they don't understand and really believe you the deep relationship between great experiences and great business results. So if your first thing you do is solve that problem and show the relationship, deliver great business results in the first thing you do, you will be on this incredibly positive flywheel, and you will then be able to build your influence, your relationships, your practice in an organization. Awesome.
I think Molly had a few closing comments for us.
Yeah, Molly, I guess we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. I know we're a couple minutes over time, but I just wanted to say thanks to the audience for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed hearing about this survey results from Jim, Michelle, and Megan. Hopefully you're walking away with some new insights today. As a reminder, we did record this webinar and it will be emailed to you later today. And the recording will also be posted on the webinars page of the CXPA website. If you are a CCXP or CRC for attending this webinar, will be added to your account within 2 weeks. So I'd again like to thank our speakers. I'd like to thank Usermind and Heart of the Customer and Experience Enterprises for partnering with us on the survey and on this webinar. I'd also like to mention our appreciation for Usermind for their ongoing support of the CXPA as a bronze sponsor. So we hope everyone has a great rest of their day and hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you guys, it was great. Appreciate it.